Hello everyone, Priest here, and in today's video I want to show you guys the deck that hard carried me to infinite and has been taking me through the ranks beyond. Nimrod, the big pink goober, is a powerhouse when he's built around, and I think I cracked that code. Let me show you guys what I mean. And this little dude is a bit of an oddball when it comes to destroy cards. It doesn't quite fit the classic destroy style deck because of its high cost, so you have to have things in your deck that will support him specifically. The trick here is to buff up his power as much as you reasonably can before smashing him into something that resembles a piece of chewed gum that you just stepped on. But just like that gum, it keeps coming back to each other location you step on. But with it being a 5-cost card, we have to make it bigger before it hits the battlefield somehow, or at least on turn 5 as it enters, and there's a handful of ways of making that happen. The deck as a whole has Nico, Carnage, Hulkbuster, Magic, Venom, Deathlock, Shuri, Absorbing Man, Symbiote Spider-Man, Sarah, Nimrod, and Arnim Zola. Now, I know that there's a couple of these that don't seem like they would work very well, or they seem like they probably don't fit super well in the deck, but I promise you, they all work very well together. I'll explain. Starting with Nico, she's the only 1-cost card in the deck, and has a bunch of different uses depending on which spell you land on for the turn. This card has so much versatility that it's hard to not include in decks. Primary spell we're looking out for this one, though, is the destroy your next card to draw 2 cards one, especially if we can get that early on in the game. It's oftentimes worth it to sacrifice Carnage or Hulkbuster or something on turn 2 for the extra cards, since we need to make sure that we can get Nimrod before turn 5, and Nico currently helps us do that better than anything else in the game. She also has the ability of getting rid of like a pesky lane if you don't have magic in hand, or you can move Shuri out of the way for a better Nimrod setup, or add a copy of a pumped up Venom back to your hand for later use, or like give +2 to the Hulkbuster or SpiderMan that you're tossing on the Nimrod. No matter which way you slice it though, Nico is a must for this deck. Next, let's talk about the ways to make the rod bigger. And no, not like that, you filthy animal. We have Hulkbuster, Shuri, and Symbiote Spider-Man to tackle that issue for us. These all have a unique way of pumping up our rod in preparation for the mass explosion that comes at the end. I'll be honest, I struggled with Hulkbuster in the deck for a little while, but in reality, it's the only turn 2 prep play that we have, and when played right, it can be more effective than Shuri. Every time I cut it, and I've tried to find something else to put in that slot instead, like Psylocke, for example, I would always end up coming back to it. And what you want to do with it is you put it on a lane where you plan on putting Nimrod later on in the game. Then you put the Symbiote Spider-Man on that same lane on turn 4. And then on turn 5, you can put Nimrod there, activate Spider-Man's ability, which will merge with the Hulkbuster and attach to Nimrod, making him a 15 power on turn 5, as opposed to the 12 that it would be without the Buster. It's also nice to have that extra card out of your hand early so you don't get a full grip and try and draw into cards that, or you won't be able to draw into cards later on if you have more than, if you have 7 cards in hand. And then Shuri and Spider-Man both effectively double the power of the Prince of Peakness, and they are just auto adds into the deck. Shuri doubles the power of the next card that's played at that same location, and Spider-Man merges with the lowest cost card at that location, but if Nimrod's the only card there, then it'll merge with him. Either way, either one of those will double his power to 12. But the important thing with Spider-Man is that even though it merges with Nimrod and the face card is Spider-Man, it still retains Nimrod's abilities, so you'll just be blowing up spooters instead of goobers, but it's just as effective. Now that you have a massive rod, though, you have to be able to do something with it. And if you're anything like my ex, then the appropriate response would be to kill it with missiles or bite it in half. Anything you can do to blow this thing up, really, though, is what you need to do. For that, we have Carnage, Venom, Deathlock, Absorbing Man, and Arnim Zola. Since mass self-destruction is what this deck really wants at its core, we have as many ways as possible to wreak as much havoc as we can. There's no worse feeling while playing this deck than getting a stellar setup and a big old Nimrod only to have no way to kill him off. Absorbing Man here is super flexible, and another one that I've tried to cut a couple of times, but I keep coming back to. Being able to follow up like a turn 5 Venom with a turn 6 another Venom is absolutely huge. It's so massive. Or even on turn 7, you can just Venom plus the man, and that's 7 energy, and you can just double Venom on turn 7. Or you can even turn 6 Zola and turn 7 Absorbing Man to get another Zola trigger and still have enough energy to play Venom at the last spot. Deathlock here is easily the weakest of the destruction package, but still is very necessary to keep that consistency. And the best use of your Zola is always going to be to make copies of Venom. On turn 6, you want to play your Venom so that it's alone on a lane, and your Nimrods are on other lanes. And then your final play, you Arnim Zola the Venom and make a copy at each of the other locations, and it goes buck wild. There's Venoms everywhere, or there's Nimrods everywhere, and your Venoms are really big, and it wins games. The last card to touch on in the deck here is Sarah. This was a bit of a Hail Mary ad for me when I was frustrated trying to build the deck with any sort of consistency, and it actually provided everything the deck needed for those last-minute clutch wins when you think all hope is lost. Say by turn 5, if you still haven't drawn Nimrod, you put Sarah down instead and pray to RNGesus that your top deck is Nimrod, because then you'll have the setup and still have the energy to carry out your plans as normal, and it is beautiful. But even then, say you haven't drawn Nimrod by turn 6, with Magic in play, of course, but you have Sarah down, and on turn 7 you draw Nimrod. You can play Nimrod for 4, destroy it once with Carnage for 1, and still have Venom for the last location for 2, and still pull out a win. Sarah is so clutch in those key moments and really has helped smooth out those rough edges that the deck really needed. As far as weaknesses go, we have the classic Armor and Cosmo combo that exists in literally every single ongoing deck that's ever been built ever. This one is super hard to get around and generally results in a loss. There's nothing we can really do about that. Shadow King also slows us down by quite a bit, but isn't as detrimental. You can still put your 6 power Nimrods all over the place. And decks that run Shadow King don't generally run a lot of other like super big creatures anyway that I've noticed. So it does slow us down, but it's not all hope is lost. Unlike the unforeseen one that I didn't expect when building this deck, that is Valkyrie. Valkyrie will shut you down every single time, but luckily that's not one that's like super commonly played, so I've only seen it a couple of times while playtesting out in the wild. And then finally, Null it can be a bit of a problem for us just because of its nature versus what we're trying to accomplish, but it usually, not every time, but usually is a 1-lane problem, so just win the other 2 lanes and you'll be fine. And to give this deck and other decks of mine a gauge to measure each other up against, I use a 5-star rating system that has 5 categories. These categories are power, setup, win rate, cube gain rate, and accessibility, which measures how easy the cards are to acquire. In power, which measures how big of cards the deck can produce, I'm going to give this a 4 stars. While the Nimrods are definitely considered big, we rely more on the mass numbers of them as opposed to making them as big as possible individually. They're still pretty chunky though, so I still feel like 4 stars is appropriate. I'm going to give it a modest 3 stars for setup. There's a couple of different ways to get this thing off the ground, but it's no more reliable than average, I'd say, so 3 is appropriate. Win rate, though, I'm going to give it a 5-star rating. At the time of this recording, I have a 53% win rate after 76 games played with the deck in its current form, and any time that you're winning more than half of your games, you're doing fantastically. The cube gain rate earns a fantastic 4 in this category. One of the advantages of this deck is that it's hard to tell where exactly your power is going to end up unless you know what you're doing. That makes snapping a bit easier to do, and your seemingly small board state that can just, it goes bonkers in a single turn. And I feel like people probably get overconfident when they see like turn 5, you have 3 or 4 cards on your entire half of the battlefield, and then they feel overconfident, and you can snap and pull out the dubs pretty easy. and the cube gain rate, or the win rate is pretty high because of that. On the other side of that same coin, though, it's also really easy to tell when you're going to lose, too. You didn't draw Nimrod, concede. And it's easy as that. You usually lose like a cube at a time, but your wins are much bigger. And then finally, I'm going to give this a 3 stars in accessibility. Nico being a Pool 5 card and the Symbiote SpiderMan being a Battle Pass didn't really help this one gain any stars in this category this time around. But unfortunately, they are necessary to make this deck as consistent as it is. If you're missing one of those cards, I would suggest putting Psylocke in instead for an earlier setup. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video and the deck. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can find me live on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Depriesticles. Have a great day, everyone, and happy snapping.